So today, Branya and I wanted to share some experiences and some ideas on how to deal with data ingestion, and we kind of framed it as a blueprint, which is sort of an amalgamation of what like experiences we had with our customers, kind of solving and being successful in solving that problem, and we kind of consolidated it into what we call the blueprint. So today, I'm going to talk for a bit, go through a bunch of slides at the beginning. Then Branya will take over and will show you something much more tangible. So this is going to be half slides and half practical. We're aiming at sort of an informal session. So if you have any questions or you're interested in anything, feel free to drop us a question into the chat and we'll either answer it as we go or we'll be doing a Q&A at the end. Yeah. So with that, let's dive into it. So before we start, let's agree on what we mean by data ingestion and onboarding. It's essentially a problem that a lot of organizations face, which is getting outside data and new data sources into their organization. So essentially, quite often, if you're providing a service to your customers, you're working with partners, you're consolidating data from multiple different sources, and typically it's about homogenization or standardization of the outside data into a format that you can work with. So essentially a master format that you define. So the problem, how can we match the outside data into that format? And quite often it's a repeated process, which sounds like an easy thing, but quite often we see with our customers that repeated by no means they're getting the same data. Even though if it's the same customer, they see variations by someone randomly adding, removing something, or cleverly improving things and then forgetting to tell them about. So even though it's repeated and kind of pre-agreed, quite often the challenge or part of the challenge is really like dealing with the variances of the data as time passes. So when we're faced with such a problem, let's think of what we're trying to achieve with a solution that we'll be talking about in a second. And I have a few interesting case studies that go along with these. And so these are distilled from essentially what we've been doing with our customers. So one objective of the whole kind of solution is to be able to accept data as it is. Uh, Obviously, it's kind of a competitive advantage, let's say, when you can say, yeah, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Partner, we can accept your data as it is. You don't have to do anything. We're happy to take kind of the burden of adapting the data to what we need on our end. It's a huge competitive advantage, a huge kind of boost in credibility that you can offer. But also it's a technical kind of simplification for them. They might not be able to do it, or they might do it, but there might be some issues along the way which you don't control. So even though it means a little bit more effort on your end or our end to kind of be able to offer that service, it also gives you much more control over the quality of the data because you're leaving their data as it is, and they're good at producing their data, and you're accepting it and you're doing all the transformation to match that. And I really like the aspect of this kind of soft side of it, where it's not just the technical challenge, but we have a customer who very quickly on realized that it's not just solving the technical problem, it's really giving them a really big kind of perception boost and how they're perceived against their competitors when they say, yeah, we can do it. It's not a problem. You don't have to do anything. It's going to be easy and we'll do it. And that kind of feeling for their prospective clients. And then when they're doing like a POC or going through the actual process, the client seeing they're actually able to do it quite quickly and they don't need anything from the client, that was a big win for them. So accepting data as is a really big, really important objective, also from like the client, vendor client relationship. The other goal for the solution that we're trying to achieve is simplicity. Not necessarily like the overall implementation would be simple. Sometimes it's just hard problems require hard solutions, but simplicity in terms of like who and how they can do it. Quite often, organizations tend to rely on engineers to solve the problem, and they're like throwing new clients and new data sources at the engineers, and that's becoming a big bottleneck. Whereas if the solution is designed so that it's simple to onboard new data, suddenly new teams, new people can be part of it, and the burden can be spread across bigger teams and like customer success teams, dedicated customer onboarding teams who might not be the technical resources that normally are being used for the process. One of that example is we've been working with a customer, FIA Tech. They're quite an important player in the fintech space. They're serving more than 8,000 clients, consolidating data from the market. They have a product called Trade Data Network, which essentially is the hub that centralizes transaction data from all sorts of different sources. They're solving the ingestion problem for on behalf of their customers, and it really was the success lied in enabling their they call it connectivity teams to be able to do that instead of the engineering team. And they have, I think, a really well balanced kind of interplay between the engineering team who's providing like building blocks for the connectivity team, which you can essentially view them as customer success teams. And they're very closely working together on being able to onboard new sources very quickly. The other goal we're trying to achieve with this is resilience. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, that's the sort of ability to handle things as they're changing over time, and they will change. Uh, Again, if it's like hard-coded solutions that or like purely manual solutions, any change takes time and effort to kind of deal with it. We've been working actually for quite some time with a client, Availity, formerly Diameter Health, who they're working with HL7, healthcare kind of data format standard. The keyword here is standard. It is a standard, but not really. A lot of vendors, a lot of providers do provide HL7, but there are small variations like different date formats or a specific date that should be somewhere is placed somewhere else in the file. So very small like changes to the data set source by source, and they had to set up a process, and they used CloverDX for that, where they essentially set up a bunch of rules that can kind of be expanded and extended as new variations kind of appear, and they can very easily adapt to those variations within the kind of solution that they've built. Obviously, that all leads to a really big part of, or like the ultimate goal, essentially, or we've talked two ultimate goals. One is automation, moving the needle between what's manual and what's automated, and moving it as much as we can. The image maybe is a bit confusing. The idea is to shift what everything that's manual, or most of what's manual, shifted to the automated bucket. It's not always possible. Like a fully automated solution is obviously the kind of really good goal to have, but not always achievable. But anything that's can be removed and can be automated makes sense. Uh, One of our clients, a company that's in the logistics business, the CISC is a really nice company. They've been around for like 40 years or maybe more. They're processing like 4.5 million packages per year. So really big load of data, and they essentially, in order to like expedite the shipping, they quite often, and depending on the volume, they quite often would have night shifts, people waking up at 3 a.m., kind of trying to process all the data that they received from the day before so that they can go like work through the daily load. And when they introduced automation, that went away. Suddenly people could wake up at normal times and didn't have to do those night shifts, which is kind of an interesting impact of automation on like people's quality of life, essentially. And while doing that, they also increased the quality of the data that they were working with, obviously. And the other ultimate goal, the holy grail, is reusability, and you'll see that in the blueprint, where we really believe that in order to scale, in order to improve quality of the data ingested, and in order to be able to really go from like, oh, we have another source, we have to do a lot of work, and we have to call John, and he's going to be really upset because he has to do that yet again. Uh, the ultimate goal is to have reusable pieces that you can use multiple times. So we're essentially trying to break the equation of new client, new data source, meaning equaling to new pipeline. We're trying to break that and creating an inequality there. So if there's a new client, if there's a new source, you don't have to build a new pipeline. And again, I'll mention FIA Tech, where as I mentioned, there's a really good relationship and collaboration between the engineering team who are called when there's something that is new and needs to be changed in the whole solution, and they just do it once. But then the customer success team or the connectivity team who are in touch with their clients and who are doing the actual data onboarding, they can use those building blocks again and again, maybe configure them, tweak them as they need, but they're not calling the engineering team every single time, and that's quite a big achievement. So we talked about the ultimate goals like reusability, automation, collaboration, etc. But the reality, and this is kind of a dense slide. I'm sorry for that. You can read it when we'll be sending the slides over. But the reality that we're seeing and when we're coming in is very much different. It's like scattered systems that everyone has different requirements. We're seeing different solutions that have been put in place, kind of this temporary, permanent solutions where someone creates a bunch of scripts to solve a particular problem that they have at the moment. And then the scripts that were meant to do just one thing are there for years, and then they become kind of difficult to manage. Or just we're seeing a lot of customers still doing things purely manually, like even like copy and pasting cells in Excel from one spreadsheet to another. So we're seeing this reality as kind of still there's still a long way to go, and we've been helping these customers, as you said, along the way. So that's kind of the preamble. So this is kind of stating the problem and some of the goals where we want to get with this. We have what we call the CloverDX blueprint for ingestion. But before we get there, for those of you who don't know, who the hell is CloverDX? Like, where did you where are you? So CloverDX and Kate, Branya, and myself are from CloverDX, which is a data integration platform. We've been around for quite a while, since 2007. And essentially, what we're bringing to the market is a platform which is ideal for solving data ingestion and other use cases. And the platform has three core pillars that we offer to our clients. Is the ability to build data pipelines which are led by the engineering teams. Could be your IT team, could be your uh, tech savvy member of a specific team. But it's we believe in this collaboration between business users and users and the engineering teams. So it's aimed at developers and IT teams. We bolt on top of that a suite of tools that non-technical users can use and participate on those pipelines. So as I said, collaboration is a big thing for us. And lately we've been looking into adding AI into that process to either enable use cases that weren't possible before, like using AI to massage data in some novel ways, and AI for productivity, how we can make our users more productive in the platform. So this is what CloverDX has to offer. Branja will be showing you some examples, so you'll be seeing the CloverDX platform in action, but all of these principles that we're talking about apply to other tools as well. So we're talking about certain way of doing things, and we want to show you what it looks like in our CloverDX platform. But let's go back to the blueprint. I'll tell you three things that form the blueprint. We believe that to achieve the goals that we stated at the beginning, we need to have these three things in place. So first is modular architecture. Essentially, how do we break the equation? Oh, we have new data set. We need to build a new pipeline. By having a modular architecture, we're stating a new equation. New input equals to just setting up a new reader, and even that doesn't have to be always the case, especially for like data that share the same format or are similar. Even that doesn't have to be the case, and the rest of the solution is reusable. So that's our modular approach. The other part, and we talked about automation already, we have two rules that I quite like. One is the rule of four. If you're doing something more than 4 times, stop doing it. Start thinking about how to automate it. Start thinking about how much you would save. And it works out if a bunch of people are doing the same thing more than 4 times, then it equals to days and days that are wasted essentially within a month, let's say. And a challenge of abstraction, essentially like how do we get to that modular place? And then there's some thinking behind like how do we think of like what's being repeated and what needs to be done manually. And it's not always clear cut. So even, and the rule essentially, the way we see it is if half of it can be automated, it's worth it. And the third part of the blueprint is division of roles, collaboration. And we're seeing quite often two roles, although they're not always clear cut. There's some overlaps, but essentially one part is the engineering part, or one group. The other group is the kind of business user group. Those are typically the ones who are dealing with customers, who are dealing with the actual process of onboarding new sources. The engineers are kind of tasked with doing it. With the blueprint that we kind of present, the engineers are responsible for building the framework and the orchestration. Uh, Occasionally, they are tasked with building connectors if that's necessary, and then they're tasked with the actual operations, potentially performance. We quite often see that performance is one of the key drivers for organizations to shift from whatever they have right now. Like they might have built a bunch of scripts 10 years ago, and it's worked for them just fine, but now they need to start onboarding new clients because they want to grow, and suddenly it doesn't work for them. It might take too much time, or it might take too much hand holding to get that running. They need to look at something that's a better performance. The other group is the business group. They, in the blueprint, should be responsible for actually understanding the data. So doing the data mapping, understanding what's in the source data from that they're getting from the client or partner, and mapping it onto the target kind of homogenized structure that the organization needs. That might require some business logic, some calculations, some further, let's say, manipulation with the data to get there. And they also should be in charge of data stewardship or data quality, like making sure that not only is the process set up correctly, but also the everyday kind of quality whenever there's data that needs attention. How can we quickly work through the problems and process the data so that it's done? For that, in the blueprint, and as I said, the CloverDX platform is really well set up for such a solution. Is part of it is because we have tools for both of those groups, and those tools can be uh, made to work together quite tightly on essentially a single pipeline. So the engineering group has something we call CloverDX Designer and Server, which are tools for uh, developers to build orchestrations and data transformations. And then for the business user group, we have two tools that play different roles along the pipeline. One is what we call CloverDX Wrangler, which is a tool for data mapping, business logic, and kind of self-service data manipulation tasks. And then we have a tool called Data Manager, which is a data stewardship and data quality tool in this case, which essentially allows them to monitor and jump into the data if the daily load or anything happens in the data, then they need to uh, actually work through some problems in the data. Data Manager is the right tool. All right, so I think we're getting very close to the demo part, or actually the blueprint and the demo part. But before we get there, I wanted to go through some of the use cases, and I mentioned some of these companies already. But we're seeing real impact of this kind of blueprint on our customers. And I wanted to share this data with you because it's not just something that we came up with. We've been using this for years and refining this approach. And we're happy to see that customers who adopted this solution are seeing real impact. I spoke about Cisc kind of processing millions of packages every year, and they're not only seeing this kind of shift from, oh, I have to wake early tomorrow because there's a lot of packages, but they also are experiencing a shorter processing time. And if you think about like how many packages they have to process a day, then the difference, for example, from hours to minutes, just this like performance optimization is a huge win for them. We've spoken about FIA Tech, the trade data network. I think they're working like with 110 different sources. They managed to be able to essentially process everything in real time, and they are kind of learning that their previous tool was a very business user-friendly tool that the customer success team were using, and they realized they needed something more, that's something more robust and something that kind of follows better rules in terms of like how they approach the solution so that they can have something that's more reliable, higher data quality. And they started working with CloverDX and their engineering team, and they now have a very robust pipeline that enables them to quickly onboard new data sets. We've the other case study that I like, I won't go through all of these, but the other one is Zywave. Zywave is a SaaS company helping insurance companies process and data. They have quite a lot of customers, and one of the things that they said was before Clover and before adopting this solution, they were perceived as a bottleneck of onboarding new customers because the customer success team would work with a new client, they would work out what's necessary to be done, and then the work has been handed over to the engineering team, and they had days, weeks that they had of work they had to go through to get a new client onboarded. They created this kind of automated modular framework that helps them accelerate these onboarding processes. And they went from weeks to days, short days, couple days. And the impact on the organization was they're no longer seen as a bottleneck. They actually are seen as being too fast. And the customer success teams now seem to be the bottleneck of the process, which obviously for the engineering team is good news. I like seeing this kind of human impact of the solution as well. Or Tech Finance, for example, they're a Dutch company. They're preparing quarterly reports. Yes, there's a number behind that, 5 days to half a day to prepare a report. But there's also an emotional side to it. And what they told us is it went from being a very stressful period of time every quarter to being a rather laid back and kind of easy, good feeling for them instead of being stressed that they need to finalize the report and they don't know what's in front of them. So kind of eliminating stress is a big part of this as well. All right, so let's talk about the blueprint now. So I guess this is what you came here to see. So let's talk through it, and then I'll hand it over to Branyo, and he will show you what such a solution looks like in CloverDX. So let's build out the blueprint. Let's start. We have some incoming data, right? So it could be a file like an Excel spreadsheet in an Excel. It could be a file appearing on some SFTP or S3 or wherever. Could be some message queue. Could be APIs. Essentially, any data that needs to be onboarded by the customer. At the beginning, usually it is like a one-off file or something. But as the kind of process goes on, it becomes automated or semi-automated. So the first thing that in the blueprint is what is the mode of operation? I call it pipeline trigger. Either it can be semi-automated, and we see a lot of clients actually taking this route where there is a human in the loop in this at the beginning, and they would use something to trigger the processing. Like they have a file which they received in an email. They don't want to automate that. We have tools, and Brian will be showing that, that allow you, for example, to upload data to the platform so that the data will be processed, or they would go somewhere and press a button and the thing happens. Or what you can do, and it's of course better to do if it's possible, fully automated processes based on a schedule, based on a trigger that watches an SFTP folder and the pipeline runs when that happens. So different ways of triggering. The, uh, what happens next is obviously you need to have a connector that is able to read the data. CloverDX comes with a bunch of out-of-the-box connectors, or you can build your own components, your own connectors. Could be smart, could be doing some very early validations, etc. This is where the engineers come in if it's necessary. Quite often it's not necessary. Obviously, we can work with Excel files and databases and all those standard formats. Once you are able to get into the data, part of that blueprint, quite important, is a phase that we call a triage. Essentially looking at the data and deciding, is this something that we can work with, or does it require someone's attention? If it's okay, so the format's okay, everything looks good, it's a known piece of data, we just go through the process. So there's some processing, some reformatting, some calculations, and if that goes well, let's put it to the target. Could be a database, could be some API, and do some post-processing if necessary. For example, logging, archiving the input files, etc. Whatever, all that can be automated in Clover, and it's part of the blueprint. This is kind of the happy path, and we know that's the easy part. So what happens if the triage doesn't work? So if the triage sees like, yes, this is a format that we should be receiving, but the file or the input message looks different. Maybe the format's drifting. Maybe there's some slight differences. Maybe it's a completely new format. One thing we can do is we can organize a process, Brian will be showing that, where this gets handed over to a user. Typically, it's like someone who understands the data, and they can use CloverDX Wrangler to provide mapping and business logic for that particular new format. So it's very easy without the engineers in the loop. They can be notified, the business user can provide business logic and mapping, and once that's done, the data can be processed in the happy path. So Wrangler is a component of the blueprint that allows business users to literally like provide the secret sauce and help process the files that are unknown. The other part of that blueprint is once we have the process going, once we know the structures, there still can be some problems. Uh, if the processing sees problems, then again, the data can stay in the platform, and we have a tool called Data Manager that essentially surfaces the data that needs attention to users, and those users can go through that. They can collaborate on if it's large volumes of data, which sometimes it's a lot of data that needs attention, that can be spread across a bigger team, and they can work through that. Once those changes and their work on the data is approved, it can re-enter that process again and be processed. So this is the full blueprint that we're seeing. Not everyone is adopting all the tools, and not everyone is doing all those parts, but this is kind of the bigger picture, that what can be done, and quite often is necessary to provide high level of automation, high level of data quality, and high throughput of the whole pipeline, including cases where you need to step in and, for example, have someone define a new mapping for an unknown or changing file. So this is the blueprint. We now have a time for demo, but I see we're having a bunch of questions, so maybe it makes sense to answer the questions now, and then we'll get to the demo. Kate, can we go through the questions together?
Sure. Yeah. I'll read them out just so everybody can see what you're answering. So the first question we had in was, what is the best way to monitor and troubleshoot automated ingestion pipelines?
I think this is a question where, Branja, you can show us some of the monitoring facilities and like process operations dashboard. Yeah. You're on mute, Branja.
Yeah. Apologies. So yeah, just getting there. I wanted to start sharing my screen while we are answering the questions. Yeah, so there's all kinds of monitoring, and it's a huge part of running essentially any automated process, whether it's ingestion or anything else. And what we are looking at right now, I should be seeing my screen, is a CloverDX server. This is the part of the platform where you can see the monitoring side of the platform. And so we have what we call monitors that represent different automated processes that I have deployed on my instance. There's one that processes customer data, there's one that processes real estate, and so on. And then for each of those processes, you have essentially things that you are monitor, whether they are, for example, APIs or some sort of scheduled jobs or jobs that are triggered by other automation features on the platform. If anything happens, if something fails, you'll see it. Right? The square in here will turn red or yellow, depending on the severity of the warning or of the error. And you can then, of course, dig deeper all the way to the logs. I don't have any failures in here, but I can actually find something in history if I look here. And you can see I have a bunch of red things that I tried to run before. Then you can actually go quite deep to see what the problem was. And in this case, I was setting up the example, so didn't set it up correctly the first time. But when you do something like this, you can go all the way to log files, which is something that that the technical team will be able to understand, and they'll be able to figure out whether it was just a connection issue or maybe something that will fix itself, and if the connection gets back up again because there was just some intermittent issues with that, or whether they need to make some changes into the process.
Okay, all right. Hopefully that answers the question. We have two more. I think we'll go through one of those, and we'll leave the last one to the very end, and I guess we'll be getting more questions. So, Kate, let's do the top question, and I'll leave the last one to the end.
Yeah, sounds good. So, somebody's asking, if I were to adopt the Clover blueprint, how much coding knowledge would my non-engineering or non-technical team need to have?
That's a good question.
Yes.
So we said CloverDX is an engineering-led platform, and as you've seen, there's a lot of engineering, like good stuff for engineers in the platform, but the tools that are meant and designed for business users, and Brandon will be showing that. That's why I wanted to answer the question right now. Is they're very easy to use, and especially now, like we are releasing next week, we're releasing Clover Assistant, which is an AI kind of productivity tool that's in the business tools suite. That will make the tools even easier because you can essentially talk to Clover, and it will help you do what you want to do. So we're aiming at like zero coding requirements for the business users side of things. We can support cases where there's business users who are dangerous with coding. They might be dangerous with SQL. We can cater to those as well. So it's a spectrum. It's not like a one or the other. Anyways, Brian, and I think we can get to the demo. We had a bit of a detour here, but let's go back to the demo.
Yes. Yeah, and I'll show those parts of the platform as well. And so let's go basically as we've built the diagram, right? That Pavel showed you a couple slides back, and if you remember this one, let's go kind of from the left to follow the process, right? So we'll start with the parts of the platform that can help you with the beginning of it, so the automation of the process, and then we'll look at how this kind of a thing, this kind of a triage can be done, how Wrangler works, and so on, right? So we'll flow through the diagram so that you can see all stages of the process. We talked about the monitoring, which is oftentimes the very first thing that I show, especially if everything is running smoothly on my instance. It's nice to look at. But one thing that's important for the monitoring is, you have to have something to monitor. And for Clover, there are all kinds of different ways you can automate your processes. Usually they are done by schedule. That's a very common thing for ingestion processes, right? You can see I have a number of them that load data from various sources, can be files, APIs, or anything like that. And an important part of this kind of platform is the ability to work with your automation in a very simple way. We have a web interface for that, but we also have APIs that allow you to control that. So we have, for example, customers who connect Clover server, right? This platform, they connect it with other tools for monitoring or for controlling of the platform, so they can fit into larger environments, right? And you can have different ways of automating your processes, whether it's the scheduling as I have here, or you can create APIs where I have a number of them that support the use cases that I have in here, or even listeners that get triggered when some event happens. For example, files arrive somewhere, or if you do like streaming processing with Kafka or similar, you can create an event for that. And the interesting part about this is kind of the flexibility, because what you can do is you can pick any of these automation options and run the same thing, right? So you might have a job that reads a file and you want to schedule it to run every hour, and like I have a bunch of them here. Or you might later decide that your customer who's sending you the data is too unpredictable. Running it every hour doesn't make sense. So you configure it as a listener, and that just watches some sort of location, whether it's something in S3 or SFTP or some sort of local file system, and you don't need to change your job at all, right? So when you think about the way that your engineers create the processes, how they build what we call a job flow that orchestrates the process, they don't need to change it when essentially just the configuration changes, whether it's triggered by event or whether it's triggered by time. And so that's the first part. You can trigger something fully automated way, but you can of course have triggers that are not automated. You want to have your users to have some sort of control over the processes that get triggered. And this is one of the first interfaces that usually get presented to those business users or domain experts, so that they can do ad hoc processes for anything they imagine, right? It can be manual loading of a file where they click on it and drop a file in here and something happens. Or it can be load that doesn't require any file, right? You just do it, run the thing, and it loads data from somewhere, and it might be an API or something like that that doesn't rely on files. So this kind of process trigger is important for those users to be able to control their processes kind of ad hoc. Oftentimes there's a combination of both, right? So they do have kind of manual triggers like this through what we call data apps that you see in here, or they can have automated trigger for that, just like I have in here. And I have a trigger for the customer load in here, but I have one over in here as well, and this one. It triggers the same thing in the end, right? The same job runs as part of these, and I don't have to like modify the code to make it work. It just does. And the best part is, right, obviously someone has to build these applications. And the way that we deal with it is that the engineering team doesn't have to design interfaces like this, right? Clover will be able to build it for you. So you just need to figure out what kind of parameters you need. And or even, for example, for something like this, where you are providing a file, you just tell Clover that you need a file, and it will build the interface automatically where you can drop a file or browse the file system on a computer and so on. So, kind of hassle-free, creating even like semi-automated or fully manual processes that even have a nice web interface where people can trigger them manually. So that's the first part, right? And after you do this, when you run something, then happens what we usually call the triage. Or some customers talk like connector matching or all kinds of things, right? Depending on what you do. And this is where it gets a little bit more technical, because this is the part that usually business users are not really involved in, right? They kind of provide the requirements, but the IT team builds it. And the way that they build it is that they build it in what's called CloverDX Designer. And this is the second part of the platform. This is meant for data engineers. They install this on their machines, and it's a full development environment, right? So it has tons of options for everything, and you don't want people who don't want to code to access this. But still, even though that it's a data engineering tool, it's very easy to follow processes if you are at least a little bit careful with your planning and how you lay out what we call a job flow in this case, right? You can see the boxes, the arrows. Actually, let me zoom in a little bit. And then you can follow the process. And this is a process that figures out whether a file format is known, right? This one processes files, actually Excel files. And if it knows the file format, the format or the file is processed automatically. If it doesn't, it will report on it, and you can look at it in a data app in the web application. I'll show you what it looks like, right? But this is a very common approach. It works differently for every customer, and some of them might be much simpler. Like for example, this one, much simpler than the other one, but in principle does the same. Grab a bunch of data from the input, figure out which one to use, and which of the known jobs to process it to use, and then just run it. The same thing, but more complex, much simpler than the other one, because it doesn't require so much reporting and so on. And so this is the way you build kind of the orchestration for your process. And if you want to look inside, what happens is your data is loaded. That really depends very much on what you are doing. It can be as simple as something like this, where you're reading your data from somewhere, doing mappings, and I'll get back to this one a little bit later, and then writing it. For example, this one goes to Snowflake and so on. And so all kinds of things are possible, and this is always done by the engineering team, and it is hidden from the business users. They don't need to know anything about that, just that it works. And then if you look at the one that I showed you, the more complex one that scans incoming files and tries to figure out which ones it knows or not. So this is what happens when you run that job, and it found 2 files that it doesn't know. So let's do this one, right? I'll pick just the first one. It created the mapping process for this. And this is the second part where you can involve your business users. Now we'll be going to Wrangler, right? I mentioned that, or Pavel mentioned that we have Wrangler as one of the tools that our users have, right? So I can go in here. Actually, I have to go from here and look at the jobs that I have there. It created one for me, this one. So let's just wait for the data to be loaded. And this is interesting because this is the file that I'm trying to load. This is real data, and it's not an example from somewhere, but in real world, when this is running in production, this is an actual file. And you can see, it contains a bunch of empty rows that I have to get rid of. This is an Excel file, so this kind of thing is very common. You can see that the header was not parsed properly, that actually the first row is a header. So let's fix that, right? I can go in here and edit that. And this way it doesn't require any coding. Let's do this. So I fixed my header, and we will reparse the file, and I can, right, that is gone. I have the proper names now, and I can continue working with that. I can add various steps to make the transformation. I can figure out the mapping, right? This is the file format, or this is the data format that my IT wants from me, right? They asked me to map 26 columns. So let's do this, whether some of them can be mapped automatically, right? I can map some of them automatically. Some of them I can just drop. I'm just going to randomly drop them because I don't know that. Right, so you can create mappings or even more complex processes like this without any coding. And this is what we mean, that we have a set of tools that allow you to create your jobs without any requirements for learning how to code. And once you are done with this, you can do a test run, and so it will try to run it. This is the one. It was very fast because it's processing a very small number of records. And now that I'm happy with it, I can just tell my IT team, all right, I'm done. Well, in this case, actually, the whole thing is created by a framework, and I can run this one, and then I have it like a manual trigger, but this is also scheduled, so it runs on its own. Now, when it's running, it will process the files that it knows, and in this way, you can create really kind of a smooth process for your business users to follow the path from when the file or when the source data appears somewhere to where they can process that, right? So we went from here, the triage, that's the technical part of the process, and we followed the red arrow in case there was something that they didn't like. In Wrangler, I was able to fix the transformation, or at least, do something in the transformation because I for sure didn't finish it. And then once I'm ready, the process will know the file next time and will run it directly, right? So it will go in here. And this is another interesting part when you think about data quality and processing. Oftentimes these processes kind of go hand in hand. In many cases, they are even combined into one job, so that you have something that's kind of like more complete than having it split across two different steps of the process. And this is again something that typically the data engineering team is involved in, and they can do anything, right? Because when they do that, they work with the designer and they have at their disposal about 200 components that can do all kinds of things, from simple data transformations all the way to all kinds of validations and so on. You can even create your own libraries and share them with others and so on. So it's very easy to build more complex processes within the designer because you have the ability to easily work within the team, right? You have version control, and you can work with your team like that. And the interesting part is, let me actually find one of the validation jobs, an interesting one. So where am I in here? For example, this one. And I'll show this one because it's fairly interesting in its approach. So one thing that you can notice is that when you work with the designer, it seems like my network is kind of slow. You can connect directly to the environment where your jobs are running, and so you don't have to be working locally on your computer because your data these days is usually somewhere else, and it's not going to be uploaded to your machine. You are not going to be downloading files. So you can connect directly to your environment. In here, I'm connecting to a server that I'm running in AWS, but it can be running anywhere, on-premise or somewhere else in the cloud. And when I do something in here, it actually happens on the cloud, right? So if I run the job, it will run my job in the Clover instance that I have in here, right? Or rather, sorry, this one, right? So it will run the jobs over there, and I don't have to think about it. And this is great advantage because you can process large data volumes, right? In many use cases, we have that without having to have them on your machine or have some sort of large machine for development. All right, back to the validation. So I have a use case where, again, I'm reading data from, in this case, an Excel file, because that tends to be a very common theme, especially when we are talking about low quality data. Excel is a very great tool to do that because anyone can type anything anywhere. And we have multiple processes that validate the data in some way, right? This first one validates like common properties, whether, for example, some of the columns that are required are empty or not, and so on. It's somehow slow. And so very simple validation over here. But you can also do something a little bit more complex. You can do something like this, where instead of just purely validating and saying, all right, this data is not correct, figure it out, we are trying to help the user or help the domain expert and try to offer, for example, suggestions for how they can fix the data. And this is what you can do with Data Manager later. All of this, all the output from here, from the validation, goes to Data Manager if any issues are found, right? And this part of the process, again, you can see it's not very complicated. It does fuzzy matching and tries to figure out the best match out of a known set of values to use in case the value in the data is incorrect, right? So when a job like this runs, the output gets written to Data Manager, which is one of the other tools that we have aimed at business users. So again, we are now switching to an interface where no coding is necessary for anything you do in here, because you are just looking at your data, right? When you look, for example, let's look at the customer data set. It's what you would expect, right? It's people's names, addresses, phone numbers, and emails, and so on. And you can see that the data is not very nice, right? There's a lot of red triangles in here, and those are all errors in my data. And the validation in here, that's what you do in Designer, right? The job that I have shown you does something like this, where it validates the data, for example, that last name is missing. And of course, Data Manager being a tool for business users, I can go in and fix it in some way, right? So I've cut the first name because the first name and last name are combined, and it's probably supposed to be like this. So I'm editing now my data, and when I'm happy with what I wrote, I can approve it, which is essentially my way of saying that that the record is done, and I have no more work to do on it, and it should go to whatever the target system is. And you can see that appeared over here. I can of course approve a bunch of them. Let's grab just a few of them so that we have a few records to process. And this kind of thing is designed for many users to work on your data at the same time. So you can have different users with different permissions. You can do kind of two-level approval process where users edit the data and then someone else needs to review and approve whatever they've done. So this is aimed for organizations that have, for example, a large number of students helping them onboard their data, right? So they hire temporary workers for like a month or two, a couple hundred of them. They onboard tons of data, they fix it like this, going through the data set, fix it, some sort of a team lead or someone else approves all of that. And when they are happy with that, it's processed and goes to wherever it needs to go. In this case, the data goes into the warehouse for reporting, but it can be anything, right? That's kind of the ending of the process. And when you do this, you need to do the end. So there needs to be some sort of a trigger for the process that takes data from here, whatever was approved or whatever is correct, and then runs it to the completion. And again, we are back at the automation features in the server. This is the one, where's that? Process approved customers is the job that in my case triggers once per hour, but I can also run it manually if I want to, like this. Or I even have a data app that does the same thing, right? So I give my users control, whether business users wants to process some data out of band or it's triggered on its own as it's supposed to. So it runs, and if I refresh in here, I will see that my records will be gone from here. They will be switched to the status that we call committed, which means that they successfully were written to whatever the target system is. And this completes the whole process, right? If I look at the slide again, I started here, went to the triage, did something in Wrangler for files that I don't know or for data that I can't process it automatically. Everything that was processed automatically went straight ahead. I validated the data. If there was something that was rejected, I went to Data Manager. For stuff that didn't trigger any data validation or data validation errors, it went straight ahead. And now I'm here, right? I'm in the target, wherever it is. This is built again in the Designer. Usually very simple job because reading data from Data Manager once you are processing and mapping in here is typically very simple. And that's it, right? Oftentimes you want to archive your data for some reason, for example, for compliance or to be able to investigate incidents a little bit later. So there's usually a process or part of the process that copies the data somewhere. Maybe it archives the staging database or zips the files and saves them somewhere and so on, right? So essentially for every part of the process, there's part of CloverDX product. And the green parts are what's built by the data engineers, requires the designer, and those are typically the difficult parts of the process. But the business users, the domain experts, can work with them in interfaces that have been designed for them without having to learn any coding at all. Right? In Wrangler, you might need to write a formula. If you need to multiply something by 2, you say 2x, whatever value you want. So about as complex that is. And then it processed it through Data Manager and to the end. Right? And I have one more last thing to show, which I haven't plugged into the demo because it's something that we are releasing next week. But Pavel mentioned that we are releasing what's called Clover AI Assistant. That helps you work with your data within Wrangler without having to do anything that even resembles coding. Right? Usually when you create something in Wrangler, you are selecting steps like this. Right? For example, if I wanted to sort my data, I click on it, sort, click the button, and it adds a step to sort my data by due date and so on. Right? So this is how you create jobs in Wrangler. But if you have AI Assistant, what you do is you just type what you want. Like, for example, I still have a bunch of errors in here. Right? If I look at that, my data has some errors. I can look at what they are. And this is because I have missing reference data in here, and so it doesn't join. So what I can do is very simple, type what I want. Remove rows with errors. Let's fix it. All right, and let's figure out what the AI does for this. And you can type, of course, something a lot more complex. Actually, this whole job was created with AI, except for the sorting that I did just a minute ago. Everything that's in here has been created by typing something into the Ask Assistant box, getting a response, and either rejecting that if the AI didn't do what I expected, if I needed to modify my prompt in some way, or simply accepting the solution and moving on to something a little bit more complex. So let's give it a little bit of time to figure this out. And what it's doing now, it's looking at what kind of errors are available and trying to figure out steps or transformation steps to remove the errors from the data set. So let's give it a few more seconds. We'll see what it completes.
It seems like your internet is acting up a little bit. We're getting dangerously close to the top of the hour.
So, but I am pretty much done, right? There's one suggested error, one suggested step. I accepted that. It's now part of my transformation, and the errors are gone. Right? You see no more red marks anywhere in here. So this is like the next generation of helping the business users do something with their data without, or with even less coding than what they had to do before.
All right. Thank you, Branja. That was an interesting demonstration. So let's get to the end of this session. I think we tried to show you a blueprint, which is kind of a way of thinking and how to structure things. You don't necessarily have to use CloverDX to achieve good results. Obviously, we like seeing CloverDX used for that, for such solutions, because it's a really well suited tool for the collaborative way of looking at things. We're here to answer questions. We have one more question. If you have any further questions, type them into the question box, or you can drop us an email at hello@CloverDX, and we're happy to get in touch with you, either Branja or myself. So Kate, let's do questions now.
Yeah, so we have a question from somebody who already has Clover, but is asking, if I had to onboard twice the volume of data by next week, how much hands-on work would I need to do before I could rely on Clover's automations to handle the onboarding?
Oh, that's a tough one. It really depends.
Yes.
It can be quite a lot. We've had customers who spent months building very complicated frameworks, but it's not because it will be difficult. It's really the process of building something that you can then reuse for like hundreds, thousands of different data feeds, or it can take a couple of weeks to set something up, and you can be good to go. Branja, any further experiences there?
Yes. So one thing, if you already have the framework that's built in the style that we mentioned, kind of aligns with the blueprint that we talked about, oftentimes there's not much really. And usually when we had customers who expected large data volumes, like for example, some of them have very large seasonal changes, right? Imagine, any kind of a retailer before holidays. and they see like 5 times the volume that they have during summer, for example. So usually what they do is they just make sure that their infrastructure is up to speed. That's it, right? So sometimes they need to provision an extra instance of Clover, add a node to a cluster to handle the load, because normally it's not required. But if the framework is designed well, and they are not like near, for example, the SLAs they need to have for their processes, usually nothing is needed because it will just work. Or as I say, you just check the environment that your infrastructure can handle that, and then that's it. And you don't need to code anything or rebuild anything like that. If you do the framework well, it will just work on its own.